It's our weekly visit from senior producer from NFL Films and co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show. It's Greg Cosell joining us, and his weekly segment is presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. Greg, a lot has been made of Josh Allen's turnovers from last week, and we understand why it gives Bills fans angst. I will say the Bills, when they have 3 turnovers or more, are 4-1 this season, and 3 of those 4 wins have come in the last 3 weeks. I know they might be playing with fire here, Greg, but this is a team that seems to find a way to get around it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, no one wants turnovers, and you have to look at each one, I've always believed, as a separate issue. You can't just look at a number on a page. As we know, no coach wants turnovers. But, you know, they're a really interesting offensive team. I think both you guys would agree that when you think of, let's say, timing, rhythmic offenses, like the Niners come to mind, you probably wouldn't put the Bills in that category, but yet they score a lot of points every week. And they're kind of to me, they're almost an aberration at times. They're just different, but you know, they're very quarterback centric, maybe even more so, amazingly enough, more recently, because Josh has really been pushing the ball down the field. I mean, that first interception to Xavier Howard was definitely on Josh. That's on him, because that was actually a flood concept, and he wanted to get the ball to Dawson Knox, and Knox was covered. And John Brown is really a clear out on that play. And the ball should never go to John Brown. But, you know, Josh thinks like that. That's the way he plays the game. But he also makes plays and throws that others won't make. I mean, the touchdown he threw to Gabe Davis, which I guess put them up by 10 at that time, correct? Yes, I believe I made it 34-24.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many guys even attempt that throw, much less make that throw. So obviously it's a balancing act. Their offense at times looks a little, I always try to think of the right word, you know, fractured, whatever the word might be, but yet they score a lot of points.
Yeah, I've been throwing this stat around to anybody who listen. Matty Glab gave it to me. The Bills are 4-1 in games where they turn the ball over 3 times or more. 3 times.
Yep.
If they turn it over 3 times, they're 4-1 in games like that. The rest of the league is 12-62.
Sure.
So you can say that they're, you know, living on borrowed time. You can slice it any way you want to. But to me, that shows an enormous margin of error for this offense that maybe other teams don't have. And maybe that is a reflection of Josh and his ability to make plays. But they never lose a game by more than a couple of points. If they do, it's an overtime touchdown. And they're 25-4 over their last 29 games. I mean, they are a tough team to beat. And Josh and this big play and these throws that he makes are a big reason why.
Without question. I mean, think back. When was the last time they had a bad game? Wouldn't you say that was Indianapolis early last season?
Midway through
other
last
than
season,
that,
yes.
I don't think they've had a game where even when they've lost, and they haven't lost many, as you said, Steve, they don't lose they're never out of games. And say what you want about Josh, but he's the kind of quarterback that makes it so that you're never out of games. I mean, how many times in the fourth quarter has he led drives? And the interesting thing about that is he's led a lot of drives in the fourth quarter, which have been in some ways what would be considered anti-Josh. In other words, long, lengthy, methodical, patient drives, right, Brownie? I mean, you look at the Detroit game. You look at the
Miami game.
The Miami game in Buffalo when it started to snow in the fourth quarter. Those are sort of anti-Josh drives the way most people think of Josh. You know, those are patient drives. So, you know, you can say what you want. And look, you guys know as well as I do, there are certainly some concerns on offense. I wouldn't say it's the most talented offense in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination overall. But they win games and they play and they never get blown out.
Yeah. Looking at some of Josh's numbers from last week, though, Greg, he attempted 21 throws of 10 yards or more, 13 throws of 20 yards or more. For those that don't know, that's a fat number. And I know it's because Josh Boyer, the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins, for some reason decided, I'm going cover 0. I mean, he went cover 0 on 3rd and 15, Greg. We never see that. Blitzed on 40% of his dropbacks. Do you attribute what Miami was doing as the sole reason why Josh was chucking it down the field as much as he was?
Look, I think we know, Brownie, that Josh has a really aggressive mentality. That's probably not likely to change. So the opportunities presented themselves. He's going to take those opportunities. The 3rd and 15 you mentioned was the 52-yarder to Diggs. And, he saw, cover 0. He had Diggs matched on Howard, and Diggs ran right by him. And he made a great throw. Those are the throws that he makes. But I certainly think that his mentality is such that he's going to do that more often than not. You wonder if earlier in the year, I would say, and I think you guys would agree, there were more rhythmic type throws where the ball was coming out, and there were more sort of sustaining type throws. They still hit big plays, but overall there were more sustaining throws. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, if Dawson Knox doesn't drop the touchdown and Kaiir doesn't drop that, he probably throws for what, 425 yards, something like that. So it's very difficult to say that he did not have a good game given the number of plays that he did make.
How do you think the Bills' offense has evolved over the course of this year under Ken Dorsey? I mean, they started out, they hung 31 on the defending world champions in week 1, hung 41 on the number 1 seed Tennessee Titans in week 2, and went on from there. Then later on, 38-3 over Pittsburgh early when, the Steelers weren't quite themselves. But this is a team that was, came out really efficiently early in the season. How has this evolved? And I get it. Miami game was a little bit of an aberration because of the defense they played. But, what do you think this offense has grown into this season with Ken Dorsey?
Look, I can only be honest based on film study. And I would say this. I would say that it's probably too dependent on Josh Allen. And because he's so highly skilled, I would still make the argument that in terms of pure physical talent, he's the best quarterback in the league. Now, others can discuss whether he's, quote unquote, the best overall, but just in terms of pure physical traits, I think he's the best quarterback in the league. But I think they're so reliant on him. And here's how I would answer that as far as the run game. I don't think there's a big connection between their run game and their pass game, Steve. I don't think, you look at some teams and you see that the pass game, a lot of the concepts can work off what they do in the run game. I don't think that's really the case with Buffalo. And I don't know why that is. I never place blame on coaches. I'm not there through the process. So since I'm not there, I have no idea what's discussed or what's not discussed or what the process is. But I would say that's one area that just watching tape and seeing every team, that's something I think I'd like to see more of, a better, I've used this word a couple of times this week and people have laughed at me. They say, wow, that's a big word to talk about football, but there's not a lot of synchronicity between the run game and the pass game. No. And, I think you'd like to see more of that. It might open up some more opportunities in the pass game that are easier throws where you don't have to push it down the field, But I think that this offense has evolved, Stephen, to where they do push it down the field a lot, and Josh attempts a lot of those throws. And because he can make them, and at times does, it seems like everything's okay. I mean, the bottom line is this is the best third down offense in the NFL. And what does everybody say about third down? It's the quarterback's down. So something is being done that's right, but sometimes when you watch tape, it just seems like it's erratic. Let's put it that way.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, a guy that loves to disguise through tendency breaking. He'll try to anticipate, or he'll self-scout himself, realize what his tendencies are, break the tendency, and yet disguise it some other way to confuse opposing quarterbacks. Is it safe to say that Josh and Ken Dorsey are absolutely going to have to adjust in-game this week, maybe more than ever?
I would say that's fair. Again, you don't know until the game's played, but that's been Lou Anarumo's MO. We've seen him make meaningful adjustments throughout the course of the game. Certainly when they play Kansas City, that comes to mind. But when all's said and done, they end up playing a lot of single high safety. And I think there's ways to attack that. And I think you have to think in those terms that you have to have some 3 high beaters. They play a lot of cover 3. There's route concepts such as flood, which we've seen with the Bills. They've tried to get Dawson Knox involved with those route concepts. I can remember the 45-yarder against Miami in that same game where it snowed in the fourth quarter. That was against cover 3. I remember he hit Diggs for 19 yards, I believe it was, against New England early in that game against cover 3 on another flood type concept. There's always routes to attack certain coverages. I guess it'll depend on how the game goes, Brownie, on what Lou Anarumo does. I mean, if the Bills all of a sudden, have 14 points after 3 drives, he probably has plan B ready to go. If all of a sudden we're in the second quarter and it's a 6-3 game, he probably feels like there's not a lot he has to change.
Yeah.
Give me an idea of what you thought about the Bills' defensive secondary in this last game in the wild card against Miami. Certainly, Skylar Thompson was not going to maybe light it up. But how did the Bills play the Dolphins with the two most dangerous guys on the field for the Dolphins were their 2 wideouts? And it was just a question of whether Skylar Thompson was going to be able to get him the ball enough. What were your thoughts about the way the Bills' secondary held up?
Well, I thought they knew that, and their highest percentage coverage was split safety zone, which was dominant on third down, although there were selective snaps of man coverage, snaps of 2-man, cover 1 robber. I thought that once Elam came in, I thought he played well. I thought that was the kind of game where, watching his tape in college, being long, athletic, I thought he played well. You're always going to get a solid performance from White. Every once in a while, you're going to get beat by guys who can run like that. That happens. They're going to need a really good performance again against 3 really good receivers. And you guys know how I feel about Taron Johnson. I think he's one of the best slot corners in the game. They obviously think so in Buffalo because he plays every snap. The interesting matchup to me in this game, guys, is the Bills' pass rush. They need to generate some kind of pass rush against 3 backup offensive linemen. Now, the Bengals know this, and Burrow the last 2 weeks has been very conservative. He's been getting the ball out. He hasn't taken the vertical shots, which we've seen throughout much of the year. And by the way, that doesn't mean he's not going to do that this week. You never know. All bets are off. It's a playoff game. You don't know. All you have is what has happened prior, but you don't know what's going to happen in this game. Because Burrow throughout the year, until recently, was very aggressive. When he had what he saw as one-on-one outside the numbers, he would take vertical shots and give Higgins and Chase a chance to make plays. So he certainly could do that again. But I think their D-line pass rush, however they choose to do it, whether it's 4 down linemen, whether it's 3 down linemen with either Milano or Edmonds adding in as the 4th rusher, not the 5th rusher, the 4th rusher, somehow they have to get pressure. They have to defeat that O-line.
Speaking of their offense, Greg, running the football has been a slog for them all season long, whether they were healthy or not. Now they're not healthy. How much does that cater to the Bills' defense potentially making the Bengals more one-dimensional than maybe they already are?
And I think that's critical, Brownie, because they do try to run it. It's not as if they never try to run it. And so you have to stop them so you get to the 2nd and longs and the 3rd and longs where at least their play calling will become more predictable. That has to be a major part of this game. This can't be the week that they get their run game going if you're a Bills fan. Right. So that's critical because, look, every coach in the league will tell you if you can get into long yardage situations, you feel like as a defensive coordinator that you have the advantage. Your playbook becomes wider and bigger, and there's more things you can do. We've seen Milano be really effective as a blitzer. We've seen Edmonds now being used at times as a blitzer. Taron Johnson coming off the slot, off the edge. So they've done a nice job with their selective use of pressure because, as you guys know, they're not a high percentage blitz defense, but they do it selectively and they do it well.
And what do you think that looks like against this offensive line? When they had the injury and Jonah Williams had to leave the game with a dislocated kneecap, it seemed to me Cincinnati's offense really dropped off. They stopped moving the ball consistently, and they stopped scoring points. I guess the question is why?
Well, they got very conservative. Keep in mind the longest pass play last week by Burrow was 19 yards. That rarely ever happens. So, they've gotten conservative. Obviously, they played an offense last week that was not likely to put up a lot of points. We'll see what happens this week. I mean, look, all we have is what's transpired up to this point. There's not many games. I mean, can you recall a game where the Bills scored 10 points? I mean, you would think that the Bengals are going to have to score in the 20s to compete and win this game, which, by the way, they can. I mean, this is not a gimme. You guys know that. But the point is they're going to have to score, and, and unless the Bills really give them short fields, which could happen, obviously, they're going to have to move the ball and they're going to have to score. And normally, to do that with any kind of consistency, you need some kind of explosives in your offense, and they really haven't played that way the last couple of weeks.
Greg, do you have any other game besides this one that kind of intrigues you based on the matchups? Because this one I think most people feel this is the marquee one just because of the two young quarterbacks involved. But is there a one?
I would agree. Well, just being in the Philly area, I'm obviously fascinated by the Philly game. But I would say the San Francisco Dallas game, probably from a tactical perspective, I find really intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if this is the end of the road for Brock Purdy, who's been remarkably efficient as a starter, but I don't think he's seen a pass rush like this before.
Yeah, but I will say this, Brownie, and you could be right. You never know how a game plays out. And if they get into long yardage, you could 100% be right. But the way the 49ers play offense, I think that actually puts a lot of pressure on Dallas, because Dallas is very multiple up front, and they have a really good pass rush that attacks in many ways. But that's more of their second and long, third and long deal. If the Niners can stay ahead of the change, which they do as well as any team in the league, as you know, then I'm really curious to see how Dallas plays, because that's not how they want to play on defense. They want to be in an attacking mode, and the Niners, with the way they play offense, really prevent defenses from being in an attacking mode.
Why can't NFL defenses make Brock Purdy look bad?
Well, I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the Niners play a ton out of 21 personnel with two backs, Juszczyk, and a tight end. So what do NFL defenses do in response? For the most part, they play their base defense, whatever it may be. In Dallas's case, it's big nickel with three safeties. But as you know, Steve, most teams' pressure fronts and pressure concepts don't come out of base. They come out of their sub. So a lot of teams get stuck. They're not sure how to match up. Do we play base, and then we could get stuck in the pass game, with the way they can line up McCaffrey and Samuel all over the formation? Do we play nickel because we're worried about all these pass weapons, but then we get mauled in their run game? But the bottom line point is most teams' pressure packages do not come out of their base personnel.
Right, so they have struggled. I mean, teams struggle to put pressure on Purdy because they don't have the right people on the field. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, sure, can you pressure out of base? Of course you can, but that's not the way most teams are structured. And then the other factor you have is when they're in 21 personnel, they have 5 eligible receivers, including Juszczyk. Now he's part of this, that can line up anywhere in the formation. So now all of a sudden, you line up defensively, and here's McCaffrey split, and here's Kittle split on the other side, and here's Samuel in the backfield, and here's Juszczyk in the slot. And all of a sudden now you get into communication issues. So what do teams do, Steve, as you well know, because you played in a spread offense that probably forced defenses to do the same thing? What do? They line up in what we call their default defense. And the 49ers know what that default defense is going to be with pretty much every team. So what does that do, Steve? It gives Purdy more information pre-snap, and that's what you're trying to do with your quarterback.
Yeah, especially when he's a rookie.
So Greg, wait, one last thing. So has Purdy played as well as the other quarterbacks who he backed up? Is he playing as good as Garoppolo did? Is he playing as good as Trey Lance did before they got hurt? Is he the best guy that has taken snaps for them this year?
I would say the answer is probably yes, and there's 2 reasons for that real quick. Number one, he is very athletic and light on his feet, so he's added the play-action boot game and the second reaction game, movement game, which Garoppolo could not give them.
Right. All right.
Great stuff,
Thanks,
Greg.
Greg.
Thanks as always. Enjoy the games this weekend.
All right, guys, look forward to next week.